good. I'm good. I am.
I saw you holding your phone up in the session. I was like, wait, he's like.
No, I was taking pictures and tweeting.
There you go.
This is my first time ever tweeting.
I've been doing a little bit more of that.
So we'll get started. I was letting people kind of filter back in. I have a funny feeling this is going to be it.
Yeah, this will be it. Yeah. And I think people probably filtered out, so we probably want to start it relatively soon.
Yeah, I mean, the last speaker ended at 4:05.
Yeah.
And so I basically said, I have to end you at 4:05. But if you want to talk
I
the speaker,
was there for that. You did a great job. You did a fantastic job. All right. Well, let's just get Ben back in a moment, and then we'll get started. Sure. And I'll just stick my head out the door and see.
Hello. Hi. My name is Jack McDevitt. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Social Science and Humanities. And on behalf of the Dean, Uta Puiger, I'd like to welcome you all to Northeastern. It's great to have this conference here. It's great to have Ari represented and all the organizations that you all are. I just came from a panel on public safety that was wonderful and illustrative of the kinds of analysis that can be done, and also where we might think of in the future. So I think it's your day today and day tomorrow is going to be filled with some really fascinating research. As Northeastern is really honored to be the administrative home for BARI. We think that it's really important on a number of levels for our university to be that, because it is such a wonderful consortium of Harvard University, led by Chris Winship and Rob Sampson at Northeastern, led by Dan, who you'll hear from in a second. And also their partners in the community-based organizations and in government agencies, who are all working together to try to see what this data-driven management is all about. I'm old enough, that I remember when data-driven management was first a term. I think it was a buzzword. If if I'm on a good day, I think it was something that we were striving to do. But it was something that very few places could do, and even fewer places wanted to do. And I think through organizations like this, and all of you, we're getting there. We're getting there where you can really use data to drive decision making in organizations. You can use data to help an organization hold people accountable, hold its members accountable, and provide direction on where they should be using resources. So I think that that's something that is really important, and something that we're at the right time now to have this conference and to talk about how we can learn from each other and the different experiences of using that. The other reason that we're really happy to be helping sponsor this conference is that, data-driven strategies and management is something that is important to the faculty in the College of Social Science and Humanities, and more to the students who see this as a pathway to success, to the kind of success that they want to have. I will tell you that I think last year we had, 17 proposals for certificates that had analytics as the last word. So that's become sort of the buzzword, and we have to sort of see what the there is for all of that. But there's a huge interest in it. We now have tools that can do it, that can do the analyses and help us to see the data in ways. And I think that the other thing that's really exciting about this is Boston and Massachusetts. You have a place where we have a coming together of lots of universities, lots of organizations that are concerned with social justice and social issues. And we're at a place where partnerships across universities like Bari, between Harvard and Northeastern and others, is something that is thought of as the right way to do business, not, oh my God, we could never talk to them. They might write a grant proposal and beat us. So I think that seeing something in Boston, seeing something that cuts across community organizations, public sector organizations, universities, is a place where we can really start to make a difference in the lives of people that we care about. And I think that's the place that we all want to end up. So again, I want to thank you for coming, and to tell you how important it is for Northeastern that you're all here and that we're helping to sponsor this. It's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Dan O'Brien. Dan is one of the co-directors of Bari, as you probably know, but also he's an assistant professor in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs. He's also in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Do you think we have you spread just a little too thin? But he's come to us and he's just been a huge asset. His students love him, and we love him as a person who does research that matters.
Thank you, Jack, for the kind introduction, and of course for helping us host this this week. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. I know a lot of you personally, and those of you who I don't yet, I look forward to getting to meet you over the next day and a half. It's great to have everyone here. I'm going to be brief because we took a couple minutes in between to let people kind of straggle in from the session beforehand, and I want to turn it over to Ben because that's who you're here to see. I have a couple really quick operational announcements. One is Bari is now on Twitter as of like 5 days ago, and I'm going to admit to you all, as a guy who actually has analyzed Twitter data, I have never used Twitter before today, which is an odd juxtaposition of facts there. But so we are, as you can see up there, at Bari Boston. We are tweeting as fast as our thumbs can type about everything we see, and hashtag Boston Data for the next day and a half. Is the hashtag we have commandeered. We're going to do hashtag Bari. Apparently we're going to need to reclaim that because it produces a lot of people on vacation on the island of Bari in Italy, which looks a lot different from what's going on in this building. So there's that, and then also just a reminder about tomorrow afternoon, the Friday afternoon reception and poster session, quote unquote, that will end the conference. It is not quite a poster session. It's our take on a poster session. It's actually a data dashboard session where people from various institutions with data dashboards will be walking around with tablets generously provided by Microsoft's Office of Technology and Civic Engagement to demo for you ways that they're looking at data dynamically and publicly. So those are my operational announcements. Quick thank yous again to Northeastern University College of Social Science and Humanities and School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs for being the home to VARI and for helping make this conference possible. To Microsoft Technology and Civic Engagement again, and to the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard and the City of Boston for being co-sponsors of the event and partnering with us on this. To the conference committee, which you can look at the list of them in the back of your program, but 8 generous individuals from both public and academic sectors who have been, the brains behind this operation. They've been the independent review panel for talks and building panels and things like that, and they've been fantastic. This couldn't have happened without them. And the most important thank you, I think, Sam Levy, who's sitting here in the second row. Sam is VARI's program coordinator, and while I get to talk to you, she is the one who's actually made all this happen. And so, Sam, if you want to stand up for a moment, you deserve a round of applause. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Levine, who I will introduce you to quickly. Ben is the executive director of the Metro Lab Network, which is a nationwide consortium of city-university partnerships. I think we're at, 40 at this point? 40 city-university partnerships from across the country, all of whom are trying to figure out how to best use data to better understand and serve the city. Previous to this role, Ben was policy advisor at Department of the Treasury. He was working a lot there in state and local government finances, and particularly the finances of infrastructure. I imagine Ben will probably give you more of the history of the MLN, but essentially from a collaboration of the Treasury and the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, the Metro Lab Network was born under the Obama administration, and Ben was the one who took the reins and led it forward. And so I thought Ben was the perfect speaker to end this first day. And why did I think that? It's because while this conference, right, ostensibly was to kind of raise a mirror up to the work that's being done in Boston, that's data-oriented, whether it be in academia, in policy, or both at the same time, and we can really learn what's going on in Boston as a whole, Ben brings the perspective of what's going on in 40 other cities around the country, and the overall trend that's occurring here and the community that's growing nationally. And I thought Ben would be the perfect person to tell you a good bit about that organization and how it operates, but also to reflect a bit on everything that we're doing in the next 24 hours, how it relates to a national dialogue that's also occurring. So with that, I turn it over to Ben.
Thank you, Dan. Associate Dean, I can confirm what you said about Dan being loved by his students. One time I went skiing and I was sitting on the lift by myself next to 2 students who said they went to Northeastern, and I named the only person I knew who was affiliated with Northeastern and said, "Oh, do you know Dan O'Brien?" And they told me how much they loved him. So that's my sample size of 2, but it was 100% approval rating. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for offering Metro Lab the opportunity to talk and participate in the events. I sat through a couple of the sessions this afternoon, and they were just fascinating, and I think represent some of the leading work that's happening across the network. I wanted to acknowledge a few folks, some who aren't here, but obviously Dan, Catherine Lusk, who's been involved with us at Metro Lab a lot, and Nigel Jacob, who I think will be talking to this group tomorrow, who sits in our steering committee and has been really helpful to our organization. So I'm going to cover a couple of topics today, and I'm certainly going to talk about Metro Lab, and I think just to give a little additional context, we're a network of 40 city-university partnerships. The idea behind Metro Lab is that universities can become an R&D arm, essentially, for local government or for state government. And I think this work has been developing over the course of the last several years, but it's really exciting to see what's happening here. And I think that what's happening in VARI really represents the leading edge of really applied, urban-focused research. And I think Boston's better for it, and commend all of you for being involved in this terrific initiative. So I'm actually going to spend some time talking about some questions about kind of the history of how technology has changed cities. And I want to bring that back to what we're looking at now when we talk about data analytics, when we talk about big data, when we talk about sensors, and all the topics that were mentioned this morning will be covered tomorrow. And so I want to start with something that everyone here talks about all the time. I think that some of these themes will resonate with this group as a group that thinks a lot about cities and the trends that we're seeing. So we know that the country in the United States is urbanizing, the world is urbanizing faster than the United States. I think the projections suggest that by 2050, 2/3 of the world population will be living in cities. When you compare that to 1950, it's about double. So we're seeing a tremendous process of urbanization. Now, I want to talk about another sort of cliche among folks who focus on city issues and how technology is changing government, and that's talking about the different stages of industrial revolution. And so you've probably seen something like this. This is a slide that was probably created by a consulting firm, and there's probably about 50 different iterations explaining how the fourth industrial revolution is going to change every sector. And so hopefully we can explore a little bit of how it might change local government. So the first industrial revolution, largely in the 19th century, involved the use of machines powered by water and steam. And the output was factories and locomotives. The second industrial revolution, which began in the late 19th century, involved the division of labor and mass production, largely aided by electrification. The third, electronic and IT systems, beginning in the 1970s, helped automate production. And now we sit on the edge of a fourth industrial revolution, driven by cyber-physical systems, or Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and more. In 2015, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology issued a report called The Future of Cities, which is an interesting report to go back and read. And they talk about how these different stages of industrial revolution affected cities. And so I want to share some maps and images that I think lend additional meaning to these trends. And I hope, do we have any historians in the audience? Okay, half a historian. I was hoping there would be someone to chastise me for my interpretations or misinterpretations. I think we're going to have time for Q&A afterwards, so there will be an opportunity for you to disagree with the way that I'm characterizing some of these trends. If you look at railroad networks, so we're talking about the first industrial revolution, how did steam and the burning of coal create opportunities to build railroads, and how do those networks look? So I hope the folks in the back can see this well enough. The front row is empty, so if anyone needs to move up. So as you can see, over the course of the 19th century, the antebellum period in American history, railroad networks grew, particularly in this region. And if you look at what happened by the time the Civil War started, railroad networks had reached the Mississippi. By 1890, railroads reached all 48 states. And so if you look at what effect this had on transportation, so this map is probably kind of hard to interpret because of all the squiggly lines, but it shows rates of travel from New York City. How many days did it take to get from New York City to a particular point? And so you can see that it took 3 days to get to Boston. It took 5 weeks to get to Western Louisiana. And that's because people were taking horse and carriage. And by 1830, as the rail network started to emerge in the Northeast, you see an acceleration of the ability to move in the Northeast, but and to some extent in the middle of the country. Roads were also improving, so other modes of transportation were beneficial as well. I want to point out one interesting anecdote. I don't have a laser pointer or anything, but if you look at the right graph, if you look at Pennsylvania, so I grew up in Pittsburgh and probably have a disproportionate knowledge of history in Pennsylvania or Western Pennsylvania, but here's an interesting reference point. So before 1830, if you wanted to travel from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, you would take a horse and carriage along cart paths, and it would take a month. And I went to school in Philadelphia, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I would pay $39 for a Southwest flight that took like 27 minutes to get me from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia and back. But it would take 30 days. And there was a huge innovation in the 1830s, which was they built a canal from Philadelphia west, and there was a canal from Pittsburgh east, and then you got to the Allegheny Mountains, and they had to figure out how do we get really freight over the Allegheny Mountains, which is incredibly difficult and required. It took up the majority of the time, and they developed a system using steam to build the Allegheny Portage, which was a system of funiculars that took basically canal cars or canal boats and brought them up the mountains and then brought them down the mountains. And that cut the 30-day time to get from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh to 4 days. And then, 20 years later, they built something called the Horseshoe Curve. Has anyone ever heard of that? One gentleman in the back. So there's a minor league baseball team called the Altoona Curve, which is outside of Altoona, Pennsylvania, or in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is, by the way, a great baseball pun, I think. But it's named after the Horseshoe Curve, which was a train that went through the Allegheny Mountains and cut the time down, I think, to something like 12 or 13 hours. And so in a course, imagine if you're living in that period, in the course of 25 years, you go from a 30-day trip to taking 12 hours. And the mobility that unlocked is just incredible to think about in the context of, perhaps that's how people we'll look back at our experience with technology and the fact that probably computer processing speed has advanced much faster than that coefficient. So by the cusp of the Civil War, mobility had drastically improved, particularly in the Northeast, and by 1930, a passenger could reach any state in the 48 states in 3 days or 4 days. And so I think that it's certainly a severe oversimplification of the effect of steam in terms of how cities developed, but it's clear that the mobility that these innovations unlocked were dramatic. And I think probably if I, just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, who grew up within 5 miles of railroads, of track? Okay, so I think most people, maybe for those that didn't raise their hand, they never saw railroads go by or they were abandoned railroads, but I think that it's human, where population centers exist largely reflects a number of infrastructure and natural environment components, but certainly rail is a major component. So the next topic I want to talk about is kind of how the second industrial revolution changed cities. So I'm sure you all have been to the Old State House in Boston. If you haven't, you should go there. You notice these two pictures. One happened before the second industrial revolution, one happened after the second industrial revolution, and I think you can probably see the difference other than the color, which probably was somehow embedded in one of the industrial revolutions. You notice that there's high-rises, skyscrapers. And so the second industrial revolution, because of electrification, allowed cities to dramatically build up because now elevators, you didn't have to walk 30 flights, and additionally steel became a lot more accessible, or became usable for buildings, and so you could build much higher structures. And the same is true with transportation networks. So cities were able to build electrified streetcars that replaced horse-powered streetcars, and that dramatically increased the scope of the region. And someone who probably is more familiar with Boston history could probably attest to the development of this region as a reflection of what the streetcar network looked like. Another baseball name trivia game, which I could have a whole talk focused on the origin of baseball team names, but the Brooklyn Dodgers, I'm sure everyone knows the name, or the origin of the name is that the team was playing in Brooklyn along the Eastern Parkway, where they had just replaced the horse-drawn trolleys with electrified trolleys, and they moved so fast and exploded at unknown times, and so the name Dodgers, it signified the folks who were dodging out of the way of the highly dangerous electrified streetcars. So this chart shows the development of skyscrapers in Manhattan, or maybe in New York, or probably in Manhattan, over the course of the end of the 19th century. And that was kind of when I think we saw cities really build up really dramatically, and probably the rise of real urban centers. So the next topic I want to talk about is, well, just to I'll show this graph that's not as much about urbanization. This is a map before the New Deal of electrification this is proportional electrification in the United States by state. So you can see that it's really the Northeast and what's part of what's affectionately referred to as the Rust Belt. But this is sort of where urban centers at the time existed. Electrification largely was concentrated in urban centers. Not surprisingly, that's where most infrastructure innovation happens first. And I think this probably lends context for the dramatic impact during the Depression and subsequently during the New Deal that electrification had on places in the South and rural West. So, has anyone ever heard of Horatio Nelson Jackson? Probably the same guys who knew about the horseshoe card, maybe. So Horatio Nelson Jackson is a really interesting character. Just after the turn of the 20th century, he was sitting at a bar in San Francisco. And it sounds like the beginning of a joke. He was a doctor from Burlington, Vermont, and he overheard a conversation about the automobile. The folks who were having the conversation said the automobile is a toy for the rich, and it would never achieve widespread adoption. Horatio disagreed, and he put his money where his mouth is. He bet $50, which is equal to $1,500 in today's money, that he could drive from San Francisco to New York City in less than 90 days. And the folks on the other end of the bet took the bet, and the year was 1903. In 1903, there were 8,000 cars in America, only a few hundred miles of paved roads, and not a single state Department of Transportation. Horatio Nelson Jackson and his dog, Bud, this is a real picture, I didn't just make this up. Horatio Nelson Jackson and his dog, Bud, crossed the Rockies on carriage paths. His car broke down. It's a really interesting story. His car broke down basically everywhere. He replaced every part of his car with some either technology from the carriage or whatever he used. And after 63 days, he made it to New York City and won the bet. And so 25 years later, in 1928, there were 300 million automobiles in America, over what's the number? Hundreds of thousands of miles of paved roads and State Department of Transportation in every single state. And so, and by the time Horatio Nelson Jackson died in 1955, suburbanization had taken root in the United States. And so I think that story offers us an opportunity to reflect on, number one, how rapidly technology and industrial changes can change the face of our country, but also how there are unintended consequences. Over time, during Horatio Nelson Jackson's life, society became more and more dependent on cars. And while we unleashed unprecedented mobility for a growing middle class, we also unleashed smog and carbon dioxide and exacerbated climate change. And we dismantled streetcar systems, we clogged our streets with newly built freeways and traffic, and we emptied out our cities and we paved natural environments. And so I'll come back to Horatio Nelson Jackson, I think some of the lessons that we can learn from that. The third industrial revolution, electronic and IT systems, led to automation. Here's a picture of a steel mill on the left in 1930 or so. On the right is a picture of a steel mill today. And so I think I'll come back to this as well, but we hear a lot about trade and the impact that trades have in society and jobs, and I think that this picture probably better captures what's happened over the course of the last 30 years. Sorry, I think we probably all agree that in general these technology changes have had an incredibly positive impact on our lives and made our lives easier. I think that most of us would take our role in our society over farming or agricultural lifestyle, especially me, because there was no sunscreen pre-industrial revolution. And I think we've built amazing diverse cities and spectacular infrastructure, but we also have to think of the negative implications of how technology change driven by these various phases of the Industrial Revolution have had an effect on society. So to talk a little bit about the consequences, Upton Sinclair in The Jungle, written in 1906 about the horrific meat industry in Chicago, said, "If we are the greatest nation the sun ever shone upon, it would seem to be mainly because we've been able to goad our wage earners to this pitch of frenzy," talking about how productivity became the bottom line. And I think that we probably have lessons to learn from that observation over 100 years ago about how do we measure our economic strength. Is it by GDP per capita, or is it by other measurements I think we're starting to see pop up in society but are not the primary metrics? The automobile. This is a graphic of the city of Detroit. The gray picture is from 1951, really before white flight and suburbanization degraded the city, or led to massive population loss at least. And in 2010, which is the see, one, how highways kind of cut apart the city. Number two, you'll see incredible amounts of vacant land. I think this would be even more pronounced if you looked at some of the images of neighborhoods in Cleveland, Detroit, Cleveland too, that have tons of houses that now are sort of isolated houses that are sitting on vacant blocks. So, you know, I think this probably also oversimplifies the effect of the automobile. A lot of this was also about the process of automation and how and international competition. But certainly, I think there's lessons to be learned about how our cities have adapted to cars. And I was just having a conversation with the team from Microsoft about the effect of the driverless car in society, and whether are we going to let the driverless car dictate how we build our environment, or are we going to dictate how we build our environment around the driverless car? I think that's an important question that groups like OBrien maybe can start thinking about, that probably won't be applied to society for a few years, but they're going to come around. And I think we really don't want to lose our next battle with technology change in the automobile for our cities. So finally, just to talk about automation, I think you'll get the message from the picture, but I think that there's a lot of perceptions about automation and what's the real driver of change in our economy. And I think we all know that what there's truth and there's complicated questions about this topic, but I think the reality is that there are political implications too to people's perception of these issues. And so automation is important. And there was a report that the White House office, or I think White House Office of Science, Technology Policy, and a couple other agencies put out a report at the very end of the administration focused on artificial intelligence, automation in the economy, and they talked about components that basically components that we're gonna be borne out in the process of transitioning to a society that's more informed by AI. And what you see as a common point in these bullets is jobs, 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 jobs. And it's a different message than we hear politically, but if we're not paying attention to this issue, I think probably the folks in the room, the machines haven't come for this group yet. I don't know, do you think, Dan, that, I don't know if a machine could ever replicate your creativity and brilliance, but it's possible that some of our roles in society will eventually be overtaken by automation the same way that industrial jobs have been addressed. So I think that when we think about sort of what are these unintended consequences, I think we have to think about what are the societal elements, or what are the technology elements that we face in this so-called fourth industrial revolution. So this is a non-exclusive list of technology changes that have been associated with the fourth industrial revolution and have been associated with issues that cities are facing. And I think that some of these topics are often connected with the term smart cities. And I want to talk a little bit about this concept of smart cities, because one thing that I gather from traveling around and seeing what's happening across our network and working with cities that are addressing these issues is that there's a lot of cities who say, I want to be a smart city. And I think it maybe is the mayor who tells someone that they heard about smart cities and they decided that, oh, we need to be a smart city. And I would point to Boston as a place that I've heard Nigel argue against these ideas so much. I think that we don't want to be a smart city. That's not the goal. And the goal is not to outfit, there's a Mr. Rogers episode, or some episode of TV that from when I was younger, I remember it was like special watch day, and everyone had a watch. They wore all their watches on their arm. I think that there's a vision of our cities where every technology company puts its own device on the street pole, and we have an armful of watches, and we don't even know what we're doing. And so, to talk a little bit about this concept of smart cities, to me, I think about cities in the context of a marketplace, and where supply of services, of jobs, of education, of mobility, of healthcare, of culture meet demand. And you can think about this sort of marketplace existing in dense urban areas. You can also think about it existing in rural areas. And I think actually a lot of the questions that we uncovered in the election probably get to the issue of marketplaces in rural areas not providing opportunities, or not providing that list of of opportunities, jobs, education, mobility, healthcare. And so as I think about this marketplace in cities and how supply meets demand, I think that, first of all, we're living in an incredibly interesting time right now where scale, urbanization, and technology are all coming together and create incredibly dynamic systems, which I think is what's interesting academically for all the folks who presented this morning, is this idea that suddenly we can unlock these questions. And what I would argue is that the status of marketplaces, cities as marketplaces, is not something that's new. And for most of these marketplaces, whether it's transportation or building of public infrastructure, deployment of services, garbage removal, deployment of human services, governments have largely created marketplaces and by driving the supply of these systems. So they create a system that creates a service or creates a garbage removal service, say, or provides human services. And I think that what we're seeing with technology in the so-called fourth industrial revolution, the fact that now everyone has a computer in their pocket, or many people have computers in their pockets, and there's such an ability to gather real ground data in real time, is that now we can start building systems that are responsive to the demand. And that's something that I think is a radical disruption in the way that city government functions, and something that I think is probably a common theme across a lot of the work that's happening in this space, is how do we increasingly target services, and how do we make government resources operate most efficiently because we're addressing places where the real need is, or populations where the real need is. And so I'm going to transition sort of to what MetroLab is doing, and I think normally I talk about, or if I was at a talk in another community, I'd say, here's the model. There's universities matched with cities, and universities are interested in access to living labs, and cities want access to knowledge. I think that is spoken for already, because the work that's happening among this group is incredible, and really gets to this idea that university researchers really can inform real life decision making in a meaningful way. And so just to kind of come back to this idea of the fourth industrial revolution, and there's all these opportunities presented by the list of technologies that are out there. But I think there's also this question about how are we going to make the most of these opportunities versus make the least of these opportunities, or sort of turn them into our worst nightmare. So there is a possibility that these technologies will make transportation systems more sustainable and help us address climate change and help us address socioeconomic inequality. I think there's also a scenario where we let sensors, video cameras, basically take away our privacy, where we let our cell phones take over our lives, where we let autonomous vehicles destroy walkable communities. So I think there's definitely a dark side. You could go, it would be insane not to think that there's a dark side based on the fact that other industrial revolutions have revealed really difficult experiences for cities. So just to touch on kind of what we're looking at MetroLab, and to provide some context from what Dan had talked about, MetroLab grew out of the White House Office of Science, Technology and Policy's Smart Cities Initiative. The idea that we could be doing more to encourage universities to apply their methods to local government practice. And there's an opportunity, if all these communities have created partnerships between their cities and universities, to learn from that group across the network. And so that's what we're trying to do, and that's what kind of we're pushing forward. And I think that BARI stands in the front of that line, but there's, across our network of 40, there's probably about 10 or 15 cities and universities that are really driving a lot of interesting work, and there's a number of other universities and cities that are right behind them that really appreciate the importance of this work, and are starting to tackle it. And I think kind of what we look for is this idea that city-university partnerships can be cross-disciplinary, are institutionalized, cover multiple city agencies, all things that characterize the relationship here in Boston. So I just want to talk about a couple things that we're focused on over the course of the next year. The first topic is around urban instrumentation. And so that sort of broadly refers to the sensors, public Wi-Fi, lighting, drones, all the technology that we are putting in our cities or can be putting in our cities. And it's my opinion, think you probably gleaned from my maybe pejorative characterization of the smart cities movement. It's my opinion that you have this smart cities movement, which is pushing cities to adopt technology solutions and adopt analytic solutions, sometimes even in search of a problem. And then you separately have a conversation about privacy and about the sort of socio-technical issues about data ethics, data civil rights. And I don't think those conversations are happening together. There's a few cities, Boston being one of them, that understand the socio-technical issues. That's not commonplace. I think that cities are not fully appreciating, or at least the folks who are implementing these technologies are not fully appreciating the socio-technical components. So we are launching an initiative this year called the Metro Lab Roundtable on Urban Instrumentation. And we're going to tackle topic by topic, so air quality sensing, drones, video analytics for mobility. We're going to tackle those issues topic by topic with a small group of experts from our city university community, with partnership from industry and nonprofit. And we'd like to push out, whether it's case studies or socio-technical discussion about what the concern should be, so that a mayor can read a one-page or two-page document that explains what some of the real issues are with this sensor solution that a certain company is providing. We want to create tools for chief innovation or chief information officers that say, here are the 10 questions you should ask when when an air quality sensor company comes into your office about both technical issues and data storage issues and so forth. And so we're going to be launching this initiative, and we hope that it will inform a broader set of conversations among folks in the local government community and in the university communities to think kind of holistically about those issues. The second topic, which I think is very relevant for the sessions that I was sitting in this morning, is focused on the intersection of data science and human services. And there's a number of programs out there that have built integrated data systems, and whether they're at the human level or at the neighborhood level. And we want to kind of look at what are some of the methods that are being applied on top of those data systems that can provide, whether it's predictive methods or kind of more targeted approaches to delivering human services. And I think that there's also a huge socio-technical component there. I think the community is not resolved, or is not reached a conclusion about what we think about prediction. And we read a lot in the press about algorithms that have racial bias. And I think we also want to explore those questions. And I think it uncovers one of the difficulties of, as we move to more evidence-based or machine-based approaches, we might be replacing a system that has racial bias embedded in humans with a system that has less racial bias that's embedded in machines. And we have to ask the question whether that's actually the right approach or whether it's not. And so I think we'd like to probe some of those questions, and also provide materials for folks who, if you're a chief data officer who's working on a algorithmic method for prediction, there are certain kind of infrastructural pieces like